Welcome to the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.
Endless journey of delight and profitability.
I think some people use it as a derogatory term towards accountants.
Being visible to the employees is important.
Hi, listeners, and welcome to the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. I'm Tara Holwegner, and with me is Derek Kelly. We have with us today Paul Borders. Paul is a principal consultant with us here at Lifecycle Engineering, and he's going to talk with us today about team charters. What are they, and what is their purpose? Now, this is a highly searched subject on our website. It's actually one of the most popular keyword combinations that we've found. So we brought Paul in today to talk to us a little bit more about what charters are and how you can use them to identify some expected outcomes for a group or a team of individuals. And with that, we'll take it away. Derek?
Thank you for that very warm introduction, Tara, and welcome podcast listeners to another episode on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. So as Tara mentioned in her opening that we have Paul Borders joining us, and you've probably heard that name before if you've listened to a previous podcast of ours, because he's actually been on not once but twice talking about assessments and so on. So we're incredibly excited to feature him for a third time on our podcast. So the topic today is team charters, and Paul's got, prior to joining LCE, Paul has 17 years of being a strategic manufacturing manager in a number of different verticals, from mining, metals, pharmaceuticals, oil. So he definitely has a long list of experiences on his resume that really lend credit to his knowledge base on this subject. So with that, let's get right into it, Paul, and the idea of team charters. So explain to us what exactly a team charter is and kind of what are the different sections that make up a team charter.
Well, at its most basic level, it's a document just with different sections on it. There's nothing really fancy about it. It differs from company to company. If you go to different sites, they might have different types. But essentially, it's just it's a document with different sections. But more importantly than that, its construction and its completion is really a key way that leadership teams formalize an allocation of resources to do something, whether it's to solve a problem, whether it's to research an issue, whether it's to implement some change, or even create a new product or a new service offering. Any of those type of activities can be captured on a team charter. And really, the team chartering exercise is super important because it's not like organizations have got tons of resources laying around. So the fact that you're actually putting and formalizing resources to go after something tells you that it's important enough to be doing. The other really important thing about a team charter, it's not a one and done, right? You have to initially complete it with some verbiage and syntax and so forth, but as you socialize it across the organization and other stakeholders in different levels of management, there's a power that starts to emerge of having multiple people look at it. It does create alignment as it gets socialized throughout the organization, and it allows even the author of the charter to start seeing, oh, this problem from my perspective was this, but as the organization looks at it, it's slightly different than what I'd originally done. So it ends up targeting the resources to go after a shared vision of what needs to be done.
So it sounds like a very important document that is going to guide projects within your organization. But talk to me about the sections of a charter. How is a charter organized typically?
Well, they vary. In some of the organizations I work with use, for example, like an A3 format. We at Lifecycle have a standard, but often our clients have a different one. The one that I brought with me today is really about using the Lifecycle standard that we have. In this particular case, it's a one-pager, and there's a total of 6 statements or 6 sections on it. The first is really what's considered the business case. And this section is really where we start to address, why are we doing this? You know, what's the business gain that's going to be made? And my counsel to people is to dollarize that as much as you can, because it really starts to get leadership's attention when you can talk about the hard, tangible benefits that are going to be done. So that first is the business case. The second is really the goal statement. And this is an area where you can provide specific examples of goals and objectives of the teams. It could be outcomes that you're wanting to see. It could be stated in terms of what will be in place after the work is done. But it really gives you more of a qualitative description of what it will look like after you've finished the work. The next section after the goal statement area is called the project plan. And this is certainly not an exhaustive section of the document where you've got a detailed work breakdown structure or a tactical implementation plan. This is really just a synthesis of high-level milestones and high-level activities that are going to be pursued as the charter is executed. So, high-level milestones, again, those are all also important to get agreed upon from the organization. So that's a key one that allows you to discuss what the project, at least at this early point, is going to be looking like. The fourth statement, or the fourth section, is really the what we would call the opportunity statement. And really, this is what really addresses the benefits, both tangible and intangible, that are expected to result from the focus team efforts. So oftentimes in the business case section, which I first spoke of, the opportunity is a portion of the charter where you can really talk about sort of the intangibles, maybe some of the soft benefits, maybe some of the enabling components of the work that are going to maybe make other projects be successful as well. So that's an important area. The project scope is a vital one, and I would say that tends to be where there's the most tension as the project is executed, because there's always a tendency for people to solve other issues or to identify other issues that need to be solved. So scope creep is a huge challenge. But a project scope section is really, you list the specific key activities of what are going to be done and what specifically is not going to be done. For example, if you're talking about an implementation of a computerized maintenance management system, there could be a certain division within your company that's set to be sold, and you would say, okay, subsidiary X is out of scope because of the impending sale. So it just allows you to capture the playground, if you will, for the project that's going to be going on. And then my favorite section is the project team. This is where you really list out the team sponsor, who the team leader is going to be, and the team members. And this isn't, this is a section that can look deceptively simple, but when charters are put together in aggregate, and you've got multiple chartered improvement projects that are going on at any one time, there's a real tendency, especially in smaller organizations, for there to be the same names on the different teams, because we tend to tap the same people that get stuff done for teams. So you start to run into resource constraints. But the team members, the team leader, and the team sponsor are the real vital ones that are in there. So again, this varies from client to client, but when we work with somebody that doesn't have a particular one or format that we need to follow, this is the format and the sections that we utilize.
So it sounds like this is a one-pager that's going to get people excited about the project, get them ready to back it with some investment, and support it from leadership. So let's go over those sections just one more time. A business case, a goal statement, a project plan, an opportunity statement, a project scope, and your project team.
Now that we understand what a team charter is and the various components of a team charter, Paul, tell me about how a team charter is used to help improve reliability within manufacturing organizations.
Fundamentally, what's going on within organizations as they try to improve reliability is that there's a lot of things that need to be worked on. Oftentimes, the key areas that we go in and work on are like work management, reliability engineering, and materials. And because there's so many overlaps for those areas, it is vitally important that charters be put together so that people aren't stomping on other parts of the improvement efforts. So there's touch bases that need to be called out sometimes on team charters. For example, you might have a a member of the reliability engineering team sit in on a materials management team so that you have effective handoffs and touch points between those two works. But there's also a sequencing aspect with respect to reliability that's important. There's some things that you want to do earlier. For example, if you don't have a good asset criticality work done, it's really important that a chartered team to address asset criticality is done on the front end of that, so that you're not working on lower importance assets within your organization. So at the end of the day, it helps you to orchestrate the solutions to a relatively complex problem to work through. And it's the tricky part is that it takes multiple years to do that. That's all in managing the timeline and milestones and so forth.
Paul, let me ask you this question, though. If a facility just doesn't have a team charter developed and set in place, what might be some of the negative impacts on the reliability improvement project they're going through?
Yeah, so And candidly, this is an area where I personally made a real mistake in my own leadership. So if you roll back the clock and you go back to about 2001, I was a young plant manager at a large plastics operation up in North Carolina, and I got very excited about a particular approach for managing continuous improvement in my operation. And we used a model that came from a guy that was really good, and it was a great approach. And what the mistake that I made was that we were allocating resources, but we were keeping the work that was to be done just simply in the verbal domain, right? We all sort of would say, yeah, we need to go after the line improvement project, right? And everybody knew what that was, or everybody had their idea of what that was. And my learning was that people can have different perspectives on what needs to be done, and words are powerful, and words have real meaning. And when you commit the written word, it really starts to clarify the work and that has to be done. I've heard the statement that a thought that can't be expressed in writing is an unclear thought. And I think that's really applicable to this particular discussion because people have different ideas. And the mistake that I made was that I might have 10 different teams working on different things, and 8 of them might be doing exactly what we all agreed upon and what was important to do. But there would be a couple that would go down the road that we had talked about, and then they would veer slightly to the left, and then they would be working on something that was different or dramatically different. In one case, I had a team that just went down the rabbit hole, and they would come back and report, and I'd be like, "Are we talking about the same thing?"
Oh wow!
So it was a learning for me that the farther along you get away from the initial discussion, the more that people will paste over their own interests and their own interpretation of what needs to be done. So the bottom line is that you have to have structure and discipline, both personally to commit the face time to your computer screen to do this, and you have to be committed to socializing that written document and around. All those things take time, and I think that's the issue. Is that people just get in a hurry and they forget to do stuff. So, anyhow, that's the downside.
So, in other words, stay thorough and be dedicated to the process. So, Paul, I read somewhere in a different article that these team charters, while we sit here and we talk about how important they are, and we have the analytics of our website to back us up as one of the most searched items on our website, that there's still a very underutilized tool within manufacturing organizations. And with someone with your experience, do you find that this is an often overlooked tool?
It depends on the organization. Some organizations really do a nice job putting charters together, and they have a good approach where they manage continuous improvement. A lot of the organizations that aren't that mature, it is an underutilized tool, and you look at them and you have to do very basic team charter training. But it sort of goes back to what I started to mention earlier, is that it takes work. You got to open up your computer screen, you've got to be very intentional about wording, you've got to talk with other people and get them to review it, and all that takes time. And it's also There's a little bit of vulnerability there, because when a team charter is really done well and you're socializing it across different stakeholders and multiple levels of management, you're sort of laying yourself out there for criticism and so forth. And ultimately, by developing a charter, it ultimately saves time because you have less deconfliction to work through within the organization. But at the bottom line is that they do take work, they are time consuming, and it takes a bit of effort to sort of work them through and get them positioned correctly.
So the team charters are the North Star, if you will, of your improvement efforts or your problem-solving focus. But what if you have multiple stars out there? What if you're on a leadership team that's governing multiple improvements using multiple chartered projects going on? How do leadership teams govern those multiple chartered projects?
Well, the short answer is that they govern it poorly or they govern it well. And it's been interesting for me as a guy that works across a lot of different corporations to see that many really sophisticated organizations, that the names that you would recognize immediately, they really struggle with this. More mature organizations that have worked for this, they have sort of been through this learning curve before. There's a variety of different ways that you can set up a governance structure. There's a couple ways that we've worked with folks. There's one popular approach in lean environments is that there's a stand-up war room. They will post the charters on the walls around a given area. It's a stand-up meeting, and they will rotate through maybe 12 or 20 projects. Sometimes that gets pretty unwieldy if you've got a whole lot of projects going on at any one time. Other organizations I've seen use more like an executive steering committee model, where they have a governance meeting, and they'll have representatives and team members or team leaders from the various chartered improvement teams come in, give a quick 5-minute update. And the quick question is, are you on track? What sort of barriers are you encountering? What can we do to help you bust through? Are there some political winds that you're running into that we need to intervene on? So really those two things, stand-up war rooms and executive steering committee meetings, are both viable methods for doing that. The tendency that I see is that most organizations tend to take on too much. So I think as humans, we're expert at identifying stuff that needs to be fixed. What we're not good at is saying no to stuff that needs to be fixed. So if we identify, 25 major things that need to be worked on, and we've got the resources to maybe go after 15 of them, the tendency that I see with organizations is that they charter too many things, and they end up doing a lackluster job on the 25 when they really needed to focus in on the 15. So that oftentimes is like the second wave of learning that organizations go through. Is the first wave is that they've really got to commit the improvement events to the charters. Then the next one is that they're trying to take on too much at any one time. The good news is that there's muscle memory and skill sets associated with this. So organizations, when they do get their governance right, they can move more improvement events down the pipeline. And of course, there's a huge relationship with reliability. Plants that have a ton of asset chaos going on have very little bandwidth for other improvement efforts. So that's why reliability is so important. Is it really effectively clears up a lot of bandwidth for improvement in other areas of the business.
Wow, I feel like I've learned a lot about charters.
I know. We kind of explained team charters. What are they and what is their purpose?
And how are they connected to reliability?
That's right. And podcast listeners, before we end today's episode, I just want to direct you back to our webpage at lce.com/podcast, where you can find some additional resources in the show notes for this episode. The one main resource being an article that was written on this very same subject. So in case you want some additional learning, we definitely want to direct you back to that page. With that being said, Tara, that will wrap up today's episode, and we're so excited to have had you on our podcast episode, Paul, and we look forward to our next podcast episode on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Hey, listeners, one more thing before you go. If you have any feedback for the show, or you have maybe some suggestions for upcoming topics you'd love to hear about, we'd like to hear from you. So there's two ways to get in contact with us. The first is on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @LCE_today, so be sure to follow us. And then the other way is to email the show at podcast@lce.com. Once again, thank you for joining the show, and we look forward to more episodes on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.